morning, this is week 12 and today I'd like to talk with you about the other kind of clothes for special occasions, that is the festive occasions such as weddings, funerals and the presentation at court. We'll start with the weddings because quite a lot of interesting things happen concerning the wedding ceremonies in the 19th century. And of course, these ceremonies involve special clothes as well. If you know anything about 19th century culture, getting married was one of the most important occasions in the life of the Victorians, especially for women from the richer sections of the society. This was the most important change of status in life. Ideally, rich women did not work professionally, so they achieved their social status based on the position of their husband. So of course this was for many women the most important day in their lives. There are some general rules concerning the clothes, and one such rule that is valid throughout the 19th century is that wedding dresses were always fashionable. They did not tend to lag behind the fashion as they often do now. They were not some sort of fantasy, historicizing costumes. They were modern, contemporary, fashionable dresses following the styles of the time. What was specific was, of course, the color and the choice of accessories. We'll talk about them in a little moment, because there are some rules concerning that. And also, something that remained very important throughout the 19th century is what level of formality should be most appropriate for a wedding dress. There are two possibilities. Should a woman be married in a full dress because the occasion is so important, or should she be married in a half dress, so kind of day dress, because the ceremony itself usually happened before noontime. There were actually some regulations of the Church of England that were still observed in the first 3/4 of the 19th century, that you could only perform wedding ceremonies before noontime. The practical reason for that was this was before the pubs opened, so there was the highest chance that the bride and groom, and especially the groom, would be sober. So this was a day occasion. This was not an occasion to be celebrated late in the afternoon and followed by a dinner in the evening. This was rather a before noon, late morning occasion, followed by a festive breakfast or kind of early lunch. There were some arguments both for the full dress version and for the half dress version, and this is something that changes over time. So in the first quarter of the 19th century, in the neoclassical period, basically before the romantic fashion really took over, most rich brides were getting married in full dress attire. So even though it was in the morning, they would wear a dress resembling an evening dress, with low-cut décolletage, with short sleeves, usually worn with long gloves, but it looked like an elegant evening dress. Later, from the 20s onwards, the fashion tends to favor a modern, fashionable, smart day dress, so that the time of day becomes more important than the rarity and importance of the occasion. So what we have are still modern, fashionable dresses following the fashions of the times, but with longer sleeves, higher necklines, and generally resembling smart day dresses rather than evening dresses. This is something that remains in operation for the entire 19th century. Of course, white dresses are the type of wedding dresses that you most often see in on the fashion plates because they were the ideal. They were the kind of aspirational model for brides. But of course, it wasn't obligatory in any way to be married wearing a white dress, and we know of quite a lot of brides who got married in dresses of other color, usually light color, pale blue, pale green, yellow, but not necessarily white, especially if they could not afford it. So having a white dress was a status symbol in its own right, and this was the mark of most fashionable weddings. But if you were from, let's say, a slightly less wealthy family, you would have a new dress which you could reuse for many other occasions after the wedding. So basically a smart modern dress in some light color. Another circumstance that might warrant a dress in a different color than white was when a bride was a remarrying widow. So of course there is this long-standing symbolic connection between the color white and virginity, youth, innocence. So if the bride was already married to someone else and she was entering her second marriage, she might, more often than not, regardless of the material situation, choose the clothes in other color than white. Also, if the bride was, according to the standards of the age, slightly older, so she was no longer in her early 20s, but let's say in her 30s, which did happen. So by the standards of the time, she was considered a spinster who got very lucky and found somebody to marry in the end. Also, she might choose a more modest dress, possibly in a different color than white. So white was most fashionable, and you see mostly white wedding dresses in fashion plates. But if you look at photographs, if you look at surviving specimens of clothes about which we know that they were used for weddings, not all of them are exclusively white. There was also one more circumstance that might influence the choice of the dress, and this was the death in the family. And here we have a photograph actually from the late 19th century showing a pair of newlyweds, and the woman is wearing a black dress with the wedding bouquet, with the wedding veil. So we'll talk about the accessories in a little moment. But the dress itself is black. It is a mourning dress. We'll talk about mourning clothes in a little moment. But Clearly there was death close in the family uh, shortly before the wedding. So shortly before the wedding that they could not postpone it. Probably the guests were already arriving, and they didn't want to call off the whole thing for at least half a year, or probably a year. So they decided to go through with the ceremony anyway. But again, if you know anything about Victorian culture, respect towards the dead was much more important than appropriateness at a wedding. So death took precedence before everything. So if the pair still wanted to be married, the woman would have to wear a black dress, even though she was allowed to keep her accessories. So that's more or less the situation. We'll talk about the details in a little moment. Of course, the wedding is not only the bride. The men's clothes were as important, and they basically followed the same rules. So they were contemporary, modern, fashionable clothes that suited the dress of the bride. So if the dress was in the full dress mode, so this was the most formal type of dress, the men's attire would also be that of a full dress. That is the kind of evening clothes, elegant evening clothes one might wear for a ball, let's say. Later on, when brides were married in half dress, men's clothes followed these changes, and they were smart, fashionable day clothes. So if there was the change in the level of formality, it affected both the wife and the husband. Some other typical companions were the bridesmaids. In fashionable weddings in rich families, there were special companions for the bride selected among young unmarried women, among the family and friends of the bride. Sometimes up to 12 bridesmaids. They were often dressed in clothes selected by the bride to match the bride's dress. So they were never white, but they could be pink, blue, they could be the same type of dresses, the same model of dresses for all the bridesmaids, or they could be dressed in pairs. They would be carrying bouquets of flowers, and this was something quite typical. So let us now look at some examples. As you can see, the early fashion plates from the beginning of the 19th century, they follow neoclassical fashion. You have the elevated waistlines, you have those kind of long flowing dresses, and they are in the full dress mode, so short sleeves, sometimes usually worn with long gloves. And we have typical accessories that could include trains. So for the full dress, trains were fashionable anyway. They might be used for wedding dresses as well. And of course, veils and flower bouquets. They were very popular. Veils were usually made of lace. The type of lace really depended on the wealth of the family. It could be English lace, especially Honiton lace, that was popularized later by Queen Victoria, because she actually made a point of wearing dress and accessories made in England, or if you could afford it, it could be imported lace from Brussels, for example. The lace decorations could be reused later on, so a veil could be reused as a shawl, and the decorations, rather than entire dresses, could be passed on from one generation to another. So there wasn't really a big custom of a wedding dress being passed from mother to daughter, but the decorations, and especially the lace decorations, were very often passed this way. This is something that happened with Victoria's lace. It was later used to decorate the wedding dress of her youngest daughter, Princess Beatrice. So, of course, as in many cases of fashion, the impact of celebrities was very important. And here we have a very important Regency celebrity, the daughter of the Prince Regent himself, Princess Charlotte, the daughter of then Prince Regent, later King George IV. She was the only child of the Prince Regent. She was probably, according to many historians, the first royal celebrity. So the press loved her. You would have the images of her drawings, because the photography was not yet invented, but some sort of news about her, her day, about her clothes and everything concerning Princess Charlotte. She was the prototype of a royal celebrity. Later, of course, Victoria attracted so much attention of the press, and then basically other young women from the royal family, perhaps culminating in Princess Diana in modern times. So when Princess Charlotte married Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, the uncle of Queen Victoria, she had a very fashionable celebrity wedding, and you could see the images of Charlotte and Leopold everywhere, and the dress itself also survives. So you can see it was a white dress with a lot of embroidery in silver. So it was especially expensive and fancy, and as you can see, this looks more like a ball dress with a train, with short sleeves and low décolletage. The princess did not choose to wear the veil. It was not yet as fashionable as later on. She wore some jewellery, of course white jewellery for wedding dresses, and the prince wore something that was very typical for aristocratic gentlemen, especially early in the 19th century, that is a gala military uniform. So especially with full dress wedding dresses, men who usually, if they were aristocrats, held some military titles, military commissions, and they could wear a gala uniform. They did that. In the Romantic period, the long-sleeved dresses start to take over. We also have a photograph of a surviving dress from 1817, and it is worn with a bonnet. This was quite typical for more modest dresses, for the dresses in other color than white. You would have the brides wearing bonnets rather than veils. However, the fashion plates really start showing brides wearing veils. So here we have a fashion plate from 1892 showing a pair dressed up for a wedding. So we have a woman wearing a very fashionable modern dress with the leg of mutton sleeves, long sleeves of course, and the gentleman wearing fashionable day clothes. So again, a kind of coordinated pieces with a darker coat, a light colored waistcoat, and the trousers. This is the moment when trousers really replaced the breeches. Prince Leopold wore breeches, as you can see with his uniform. Now it's the modern couple dressed up in fashionable clothes. Another royal celebrity that influenced wedding fashions a lot was, of course, Queen Victoria herself. She got married to Prince Albert a few years after her coronation in 1840, so 3 years after her coronation. She was still a very young woman, 21. He was of the same age. And her dress is more in the type of day dress, really, or somewhere in between the day dress and the full dress. So there is some décolletage, but not as low as it would be for an evening dress. The sleeves are mid-length, and as you can see, it is a it is a fashionable dress from the early Victorian period with full skirt and and a rather tight bodice. Victoria wore the veil made of English lace, made in a little village of Honiton. She also wore some flower decorations. There was a flower headdress, and the decorations to her dress itself, like a small bouquet that was attached to the dress. And these decorations were made of orange blossoms. This was a French custom that Victoria liked, so she decided to use it. Everything else, including the shoes that also survived, was modern, fashionable, contemporary things in white color. If you look at the portrait by Winterhalter, you can also see something interesting, a piece of jewelry, a big blue brooch with a big sapphire stone. This was, according to the tradition of something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. This is the something blue thing, and this was a present from Prince Albert. So she got this big blue brooch as a present from her husband. From the Victorian period, we have some more fashion plates. As you can see here, a comparison of different types of day dresses, including a wedding dress. We have some surviving specimens. As you can see, they just follow the fashion of the times, with the pointed bodice, with a flat collar. Here we have a wedding dress with a bonnet, and then we have a dress in some sort of pale blue color from the 1850s, so before the introduction of the crinolines. Around that time, veils start to be extremely popular with the fashionable weddings, and the practice of covering the bride's face at the beginning of the ceremony developed. So many of the fashion plates and paintings of the time show brides wearing veils, and sometimes their face is covered by the veil at the beginning of the ceremony. It would be uncovered during the ceremony. Whatever happens then follows the fashion. So in the In the later 50s and in the 60s we have crinoline dresses, of course the dresses would follow the contemporary fashion. This is the time when the eldest children of Victoria get married. So we have a portrait by Winterhalter of Princess Victoria, the eldest daughter of the Queen and Prince Albert, in her wedding dress. She married the heir to the throne of Germany, and so she later became the Empress of Germany. Then we have Princess Alice in her wedding dress. We can assume it is a crinoline dress. And then in 1863 we have the photograph of the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII, and his bride, Princess Alexandra of Denmark. As you can see, she's wearing a veil. There are lots of flower decorations in all of these cases. This is really the situation that continues throughout the crinoline period. So we have quite a lot of images of fashion plates showing brides wearing crinoline dresses. And we continue in a moment.